to Christ the Center, your weekly conversation of Reformed theology. By my count, we're on episode number 830. My name is Camden Busey. I'm in Libertyville, Illinois, as usual, at the Reformed Forum studio, and I'm delighted to be back to discuss Reformed theology, to discuss the biblical theology of Meredith Kline. And we're doing so today with Dr. Michael Beck, who is pastor at Gracenet Community Church in Wellington, New Zealand. He's also a lecturer of Old Testament and biblical theology at Grace Theological College there in New Zealand. Welcome to the program, Michael. It's great to see you.
So great to be with you, Camden. It's surreal. It's surreal. I mean, I've watched you so many times, so it's kind of weird to be here with you. And I would say as well, I don't feel worthy of the honor. I mean, it's we sit in New Zealand and we watch from afar, and we're in awe. You know, you guys are among our faves. And so, you know, my goal in some ways is just to kind of not subtract awesomeness from the show. That's kind of...
Well, you're too kind. You're piling it on thick here, but that's fine. I appreciate it. And I must say that I think with the shaved head and the beard, I think we're kindred spirits. I appreciate that.
I was about to say, yeah, I mean, I like your style. I think it's good.
I did watch also some episodes that people should know about the Two-Age Sojourner podcast, and I did watch at least one episode before, and I saw at least two other brothers similarly adorned. So we have a tribe going on.
Oh, exactly. We have a people. We're good. And most of them are Kleinians, so that's good.
Well, I'm very much an admirer and appreciator of Meredith Kline. People might not be able to see, but I have my Kleinstein way in the back when I was where is it here in the video? Yeah, it's all blurred out there behind Lil Nitro, nice. The world's hottest gummy bear. People could watch that on the social media if you want to see me in pain writhing. But the Kleinstein was something we made when I was in seminary. We were reading through Kingdom Prologue, and we had our Kline Club, and we thought we need a commemorative drinkware. So I designed what we called the Kleinstein, and that has all the hyphenated words all over printed on it. So there were only, I think, 5 or 6 of those ever made, but somebody
beautiful.
Might be able to dig one up somewhere. We'll have to maybe resurrect the Kleinstein and put that in our merch store.
Well, I will be first in line to get one of those. I remember there was a while that Chris Kahi was, selling them. You know, he was doing his Glory Cloud, and he was selling these weird little coffee cups. And it was like, don't jump the eschatological gun on the one side of the coffee cup, and the picture of Meredith Kline on the other. And I was like, oh man, I need all of them. I want all of them.
That's amazing.
So yeah.
Well, fun. Well, tell us about your ministry, both at the church and at the seminary, the Theological College. I should be more precise. We'd love to hear about that. We've had several. I know you mentioned to me before we got started. You're actually from South Africa. That's great to hear. Yeah. But also, I love the NZ connection, NZ, I should say.
Yes.
I serve sometimes, I serve on the board at Mid-America Reformed Seminary, but that's also a favorite destination for the RCNZ.
Yes, yes.
And it's just delightful to hear of Reformed theology going on down in New Zealand. But I'd love to hear how things are going at your church and how we can perhaps pray for you and help expand the listener's mind so we have more of a global perspective of Reformed theology around the world.
Man, I love those Reformed guys. Whenever I'm on, I just recently had a sabbatical, and so I try to stay away from my own church and sort of go around and say hi to others. And and so I try and say hi to some of the Reformed pastors, and it's just always a blessing kind of heading over there. And but anyway, so I'm from South Africa. We came over around 2005, so it's been a while, and we came to plant the church. We were part of a group sent over from our local church, and part of the broader thing that was happening. And we are we're part of the Reformed Baptist Fellowship in New Zealand. So at that level have synced up. Then what else to say? I mean, I suppose I've been married for 19 years. We've had all our kids in New Zealand. So they're all genuine Kiwi kids. I just talk about the days of South Africa as if they're the days of old, and they just want to know what's going on. But the church is up and running. I've been pastoring, full-time ever since 2007. And just kind of kept on going. I started with the South African Theological Seminary. That's what our church was very much involved with in South Africa. And, just kept on going all the way through to PhD, did it on Kline, finished that up, while I was doing pastoral ministry. And,
Mhm.
and
Kudos to
then
you. That is tough. That is
that
really
was
tough.
tough. Yeah. I don't recommend it.
Mhm.
I really don't. It sort of shaved years off my life, I think,
Me too.
ultimately.
And I
All
did all
right.
my
So you,
coursework before, and had all these papers ready as grist for the mill for the dissertation. And still, some guys ask me sometimes, they want to go back to seminary and do a PhD, and I admire that. I appreciate that. And if you feel the Lord's calling you to do that, by all means, go do it. Especially and only if you're married, if your wife is supportive. But I don't think I
right.
could do it again, man. Like,
No. Oh, definitely not. Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
young man's
And
game.
oh my goodness. And you guys have got all that coursework as well. South Africa, thankfully, just skips
Yeah,
straight to the research,
yeah.
and,
Those
but
courses that get in the way.
the courses, oh yeah, no, totally. I think I would have given up for sure. Um,
Uh,
but yeah, it's sort of like the reason I did it was I wanted to just be involved in some sort of teaching capacity here in New Zealand. We've only got this one Reformed college here,
mm,
that all our Presbyterian get trained in, and we're there's not a lot going on by way of training. So I just wanted to be involved in any way that I could. We've got a Reformed Baptist thing going on as well. And so
mm,
it seemed like a PhD was an essential, and thankfully, was able to get stuck in straight after. I mean, like literally the month after I finished, I just got stuck in and have been teaching my brains off ever since. So,
yeah.
just it's a different kind of stress as well. It's sort of like now I'm straddling pastoral ministry and teaching, and yeah, definitely have
Hmm.
no time for writing anything of any sort. But it's this is, I suppose, where people could pray for me, just the busyness of it all. But I think we need it in
Hmm.
New Zealand. That's kind of where I was going. There is, it's the people often ask, what are the needs in New Zealand, and I feel like lost at that question, because it's almost like you could just pick a spot and get to work, and whatever you do is going to be helpful. It's
Mm,
it's so it's so in need of churches and church plants, and solid gospel preaching church plants, and
hmm.
uh, any educational institutions, and we just need it all. So yeah, that's kind of the idea, just to get involved in as much as possible, and just to see something move forward,
Yeah.
if that makes
There
sense.
has been, various traditions to my knowledge. I mentioned the RCNZ, but I'm wondering about the general receptivity to Christianity, but even more specifically, a Reformed covenantal theology as we
Yeah.
turn our attention eventually to Klein. Like, what, how would you describe, people's awareness or interest? Is it something that I mean, just what do they think of it when they hear about these things?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you have a very interesting dynamic going on, in that, at one level, it's sort of, well, I mean, especially coming from South Africa, where you sort of breathe the air of Dutch
Right.
Neo-Calvinism. You can't get away from it, even if you're an unbeliever, and it's just part of the history and culture and so forth. But you come to New Zealand, and it's like just completely secular, progressive, just moving in. There's no Calvinistic backbone at all. You can tell immediately. Nothing preserving anything by way of Christianity. And so the idea of how to do Christianity in general, I mean, it's just you're facing, no one's coming to church to get any social cues, or because of any social cues, or get any social credibility. There's no nominalism. It makes it a pleasure to pastor a church like that, because, everyone there on a Sunday is there they mean business. They are going against the grain. So churches tend to be smaller than other places, but they are really, filled with uh, wonderful Christians, that are just, it makes it a pleasure to pastor them.
Yeah.
But then, in terms of like theology, and I mean, you've got it's such a hodgepodge, because the charismatic movement has just swept through and taken what little conservative Christianity there was, and sort of just led it into this strange place on the one hand, and on the other hand, I suppose, where you do have conservative churches or reformed churches, or even like, dispensational brethren churches, they've gone quite hard shelled, against the culture, and they've tended to retreat a little bit, I think, and just kind of survive, you might say. So the thoughts of I suppose, this is where I was really driven to look at the issue of Kline and culture and two kingdoms and so forth, because it feels like that really does provide a healthy way to approach a situation like we're in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like there's a constant, like overkill in terms of response, as we're hiding away from culture, and then we come out and we sort of want to smack it on the head with a frying pan, and then we run back into our cave again, and there's no sort of balanced, consistent way to approach the question and just get on with ministry at the same time. So that's kind of where I was motivated to look at this whole thing to begin with. But I suppose we'll talk about that more as we go.
Yeah, well, I should have mentioned it earlier. I'm being a bad host, but our guest today, Michael Beck, is the author of Covenant, Lord and Cultic Boundary, a dialectic inquiry concerning Meredith Kline and the Reformed Two Kingdom Project. It's published by Wipf and Stock. Very thankful to be talking about this book, and I've been working through a PDF copy of that, but the book's available. You can find it on Amazon and other places as well. We'll have links to all that in the episode description. And this book is originally began as a dissertation, correct?
Yes, correct.
But tell me, back up even further. Do you remember the moment at which you were introduced to Meredith Kline for the first time? What got you onto that path, and what were your first impressions of him whenever you read him, or at least heard someone describing his views?
Yeah. Oh man, I do. I remember it. It was kind of by accident, to be honest.
Yeah.
Man, I could tell you the longest story. I think it started. You remember video stores when you had to go to a video store to get videos?
That was like my Friday and Saturday night every week. Go to the store,
exactly,
and then stare at the wall for 2 hours deciding what to get. And now I just, you go through Netflix or something and just scroll that for 2 hours.
So yeah, we won our 2 hours though. We need our 2 hours, our ritual. Even if we have to get Netflix to do it. Yeah, no, we had to. So we did our typical video store run. It was myself and one of the elders at our church. And, we just walked in that one day, and it was just, toward the end of the video store life, it started to get a little bit, it started to degrade. You could see how you were getting some really weird movies up front, and you couldn't even bring your kids in there, and, because they would see all these horrible images and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to just get in, get the movie, get out. And then we had dinner that night, and we just started talking about, what do you do about that? What are we supposed to, here we are planning a church, and it started this whole thing. We're like, should we write a letter to the video owner, store owner at least? Should we, write to the government? Should we tell them to, change that whole policy on video stores? What about kids and so forth? Or should we just, go give the guy a gospel tract and get him to read the gospel? It just started this whole process. And this is way back in the day. And so it just snowballed. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I mean, here we are planning a church. There is no way, in my mind, we were going to, get the New Zealand government to shut down video stores that showed that kind of, stuff.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
It was just not a plausible idea. And yet we all felt bothered by it. So what do you do exactly, And,
mm-hmm.
And so it just started. I think Lee Irons was incredibly helpful to me. Just going through his upper register. Jason Stellman, back when he was still a Protestant, kind of helped me out. But all those guys sort of sent me in the Kleinian direction. So eventually I thought, you know what, I need to look at this Kline guy, and picked up a book.
Were you already pretty versed in covenant theology when you came to Kline, or was it coincidental? I mean, no, I don't mean like an accident. I mean, like, did it happen at the same time, or what?
No, yeah, I had to work through, because I'm a Baptist, right? Mm-hmm. So, you don't get to be Reformed in any stretch of imagination and Baptist without really having to sweat over the issue, right? So you have to think about it. And of course, I was doing the Presbyterian prayer. I was praying to be Presbyterian at one point, just really trying to get it and working through it. And eventually just landed, you know what, I am just, I'm Baptistic in conviction here. So, but yeah, it took a lot of slug over the covenant theology issue. To what degree can you even be called, in line with covenant theology and so forth. So I'd worked through all of that already, I would say. And, interestingly, to a degree, had also worked through the two kingdom issue, because Baptists kind of, historically, I think a default Two Kingdom guys, because they were living in the disestablishment and kind of nonconformity, and I think it was pretty clear to them that the monarchies of England weren't exactly the same thing that they were doing when they were meeting on Sundays and so forth. So they started to get a real sense of that, especially as they had to face a little bit of persecution on those issues. But so I dealt with it at that level. But I never thought about it anywhere close to the way, and I had looked at Voss as well. I should say that as, so I covered that ground. Really appreciated what Voss was saying, but it was something that happened when I read Meredith Kline. It felt like a smack in the face, mixed with doing something really wrong, mixed with oh my goodness, this is so right, mixed with why do I not know about this guy? Who is this guy exactly? Why aren't more people talking about him? Because it was incredible. I mean, just working through, I felt like he just systematically resolved so many of the things I was going through and questions I had. Difficult read, of course, but I think I was primed for it at that point. And so Kingdom Prologue, I just devoured that thing, and there was no coming back from that. Yeah.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I had by this time read, before going to seminary, I'd read several books on covenant theology, and I'd purchased a handful of them through Amazon. So this was quite a while ago, early 2000s. And I think my introduction to Kline was through recommendations that Amazon was saying, if you like this, then, read some of this. So I bought, I think it was God, Heaven, and Harmageddon. I know for a fact that was the first Kline book I've ever read, but I was reading it without having gone to seminary and without anyone around me who was Reformed to be able to talk me through it.
Wow.
And I was kind of intrigued, but at the same time, I thought, is this science fiction? Like, this is so far out there.
Exactly.
It was like completely foreign to me as writing, and he's a peculiar writer to begin with, but then the subject matter and his approach, it seemed like it was out of this world.
Exactly. Well, that's why I say I felt like I was doing something wrong, because you felt like surely this guy's off. I mean, is this a no? Are we happy with this guy? Is everyone okay with this guy? I just kept on like, I'm not confident enough to make a call on what he's saying over here, but it sounds like nothing I've ever read before. And yeah, exactly. So
it's crazy, but also intriguing and helpful in many ways. And then I cut my teeth a lot more on Covenant or on Kingdom Prologue in seminary, and that really set me off really well. But I read him as a thoroughly committed Vossian and Vantillian, and in that trajectory. And I know there's a bunch of different nuances and different perspectives. So even as people listening to this recognize, there isn't necessarily just one uniform strand of Kleinian thought or Kleinian tradition that people approach him, even people that very much would see themselves in almost, lockstep with Kline, might have differences with each other. So I just make that caveat out there. And I don't pretend at all to represent Kline. I have my criticisms of Kline himself. I'll leave those to myself for the moment. Maybe we'll do another episode on that. But the book today, or the conversation today, is all about your book, Michael. And I appreciate what you've already mentioned leading up to this. And I want to set the stage and hand things over to you to explain to the listeners and the viewers. But there's a couple issues at play here. We've mentioned covenant theology. You've mentioned two kingdom theology and a two kingdoms approach. You, in that line, have already talked about cultural engagement. Behind that, in the book, is a very significant discussion of the cultural mandate, Genesis 1 and 2. And looking at Kline's approach to all these things, how does Kline's covenant theology and his theology of eschatology, his theology of cultural engagement, how does all that help us to answer some difficult questions of the day? One thing that we usually encounter is when people discuss two kingdom theology, especially when it's caricatured, they might see it, some people would see it as an overreaction to, at least contemporary versions, as an overreaction to transformationalism. The caricature can often be, well, the 2K guys, just have this hyper separation between, the things of the Lord and things of the church and the things of the culture, and they're basically retreatists. How would you address, or you don't have to address it head on, but I want to give you a platform to kind of take this wherever you would like to go in terms of this project with Kline, how you're reacting to that and maybe providing a better way or a better way to talk about this.
Yeah. I mean, well, feel free to if you want to redirect, but I think that's exactly. I mean, this is kind of why. I mean, this is the big idea behind the book. Anyway, you see, you read a lot of. I mean, if I could just carry on with that story, there I am, sort of, reading the back and forth, and I think everyone can resonate with this, as you were saying a second ago. There's some vociferous debate, shall we say? There is some heated discussion on the internet, on whatever. And it's just sort of like, these guns firing in this in-house debate, and no one's really listening, it seems, at certain points. And so eventually, I just, as soon as you figure out that covenant theology is at the bottom of all of this, I think it is worth the time, just really plummeting the depths of that, and just seeing exactly why the covenant theology that you hold will make a difference. And that seems like a much more fruitful way to go about the whole process of figuring out who's right, the Neo-Calvinists or the Two Kingdom guys. Let's rather think about the covenant theology, think about exactly where your conviction lies there. And not only will you find out exactly where your cultural engagement levels are, you might say, but also, my hope, and I think often it is the case, that you find ways to overcome impasse, and you actually realize, wait, we're not actually saying that much of a different thing. Maybe we're saying it a little bit of a different way. Sometimes we are disagreeing, and we got to admit that. But I think coming at it from that substructural level, seeing how it all unfolds from covenant theology is a helpful approach. So, what I try and do in the book is say, I use these terms, and for lack of better expressions, talk about the Two Kingdom project and then the Two Kingdom paradigm. And that's just me grasping for some way to talk about it. I'm not trying to label anything needlessly or anything, I don't even know if the guys doing Two Kingdom work will be happy with that, but it's just kind of a way to separate what's happening now with the thinking within Reformed thought about Two Kingdoms, as opposed to what you see as a general kind of cognitive framework, a way of processing Christ and culture from the beginning of the church's thinking on the subject. Just, this is the church, this is the world, how do the two engage? And you see that running all the way through Luther and Calvin to some degree and so forth. But they're not approaching it on the basis of covenant theology. They're looking at it through different lenses. They're seeing it through a Lutheran lens and through the internal world, the external world, through law, through gospel, through through before God, before man, all these ways of approaching it. But when you hit that that thing that happens with Dutch thinking, where all of a sudden it starts to cash in, it uses this covenant idea and philosophy, and it starts to say, okay, wait a minute, as a Reformed way of approaching this issue, we have to approach it in a kind of transformationalist way. We have to think about it in a truly Reformed way. I think there you start seeing some pushback from what we now call the Reformed Two Kingdom guys, or what I've called the Reformed Two Kingdom project. And that's a helpful bit of perspective, because that's just basically them saying, all right, thank you for that insight and for those ideas, but we just want to acknowledge that there has been this broader cognitive framework that the church has used for a long, long time until that point. And it might well be that the covenant theology that Reformed thinking brings to the table actually helps us to, not jettison that framework, but kind of use it and develop it in ways that perhaps isn't so disagreeable with Reformed thought in general, and actually brings us to a better approach, or a way that's at least another viable approach to look at how cultural engagement should work and how the mission of the church should work and so forth. And so, there's the layout. And as soon as you start talking about it like that, you realize, okay, well, now we're thinking about covenant theology at the bottom of this whole thing, because now the new thing that Reformed thinking is putting on the table in terms of Two Kingdoms is this idea of the common grace covenant and covenant of grace, and how these kingdoms are administered and so forth. And that's why Meredith Kline kind of does lie at the bottom of all of that, because he's the guy who's really developing those things and thinking them through in a way that I don't think anyone really had done with that level of specificity to that point, and perhaps everyone that has spoken about it since has really only developed what he had said there. So he is kind of this nexus point for the whole thing. And so what I wanted to do there was just go, okay, well, let's just think then. I put this in a form of a kind of dialectic inquiry. Let's listen to what everyone's saying. Let's kind of put it on the table. Let me see I wanted to personally explore the whole thing as well in a real way. So I did try and be as fair as possible. Obviously, I've got to make my own evaluation of the issue and my own critique. So that's going to be there. But I wanted to just hear what everyone was saying, and at that substructural level, and then to see how that follows through with implications for the Two Kingdoms / Neo-Calvinist debate, and I think it's sort of helpful. I personally have landed more in the Two Kingdom than the Neo-Calvinist side, and I think that there is hopefully what the book shows is that there is fertile soil there in Kline's theology, without a doubt. I don't think Van Drunen is doing anything wrong by looking at Kline's thought and coming up with what he has come up with. I think he's on the right track, and he's moving in that. If you look at those big building blocks that Kline gives, Van Drunen is using those things well and doing that right, and moving it in line with a kind of natural law, which of course Kline himself didn't touch, but moving it in that trajectory. I suppose what I've said as well, though, is that I see in Kline, and as you just mentioned, you've got this kind of in Kline, you've got all these possibilities. He's got this whole category of non-redemptive special revelation that it hasn't really been tapped into, and it feels to me, and what I end the book with was just going, it would be great to see people develop Kline in other directions as well, using some of the conceptual resources that he has provided.
Right.
Even if it does land in a more Neo-Calvinist direction, I think what it would do is provide an interesting kind of unity on this question of cultural engagement, even though you're approaching it from different perspectives. It's almost like, I remember Van Drunen saying at one point, it's almost like even with Doevier, it's like his whole cosmonomic project is just like a super steroid advanced natural law idea in some ways, so they're not. It's a really interesting question. I didn't get there in my research, but I would love someone else to kind of take it on and move it forward and go, to what level is there a continuity between what Van Drunen's saying there in natural law and what Doevier was saying in his cosmonomic idea? And then as you come at it from the spaces of Kleinian covenant theology, is there any way to kind of bring those together? Because I think what it would do is it would say, no one wants to overfreight our cultural work with this eschatological burden. Wherever you land, that's going to be something that we're all treasuring together. We're never going to say that in our doing of this cultural mandate that we're trying to turn it into the city of God and redeeming and bringing things into turning it into the new creation, so to speak. So you'd have that safeguard, and then all of a sudden the pressure would be off. In that now you can just talk properly and speak friendly to the guy that you formerly disagreed with. So if that's kind of a little bit of a way to overcome that impasse. And there's some other elements that I point out in the book. Just hoping to kind of turn the discussion in a fruitful direction.
Yeah, I appreciated that quite a bit about what you've done here in the book, that it is useful. I would say even, you've got your introduction, and then the second chapter, just the literature review is quite useful. Certainly, worth the price of the book, or at least a good chunk of it, if people want to back up and just get a lay of the land. And usually I would never say that, because usually the literature review on a dissertation is like the most boring part of the whole thing.
Yeah,
mine included, but it is quite valuable and useful in this regard. And I think it's a helpful introduction to the space. And then, of course, you start moving on into discussing more of the details of Meredith Kline's covenant theology. But as you mentioned, this dialectical approach and, bringing Kline and all the different parties into conversation, at least the three primary conversation partners, there are probably more, and you could slice it and dice it differently.
Yes.
But at least in terms of my estimation and my notes, you have a theonomic perspective, the perspectivalist perspective, if I may be
Yeah.
redundant, and
Yes.
the Doyavirian, or as the critics would say, Doya weird. But
Right.
the Doyavirian perspective, or more of the Neo-Calvinist. I'm going to get an email from some people for that joke, I guarantee you.
Well, in South
But
Africa, we say because it's Afrikaans, right? We speak it's very close to Dutch, and it'd be
yeah,
"doe weert." You gotta pronounce
weird.
that R, which they don't like to do. In the Dutch pronounce the R differently, so it's kind of it ends up being a contentious issue on its
Right.
own. Yeah,
Whatever it is, it's not do you weird. Don't say that.
yeah,
That's a
exactly.
typical American way to put it.
Right.
Tell me about those conversation partners, in a sense, or those broad camps.
Yeah.
Why? I think those are good choices. So I'm not criticizing you there, but I want to ask so that you can explain to our listeners and viewers why you chose those three to have a conversation with.
Yeah, and that was, how do you get? Well, I suppose it started, let's get a lay of the land. Let's see who's interacted with who. The whole thing is centered around Kline, so obviously you have to put some delimiters on who you can look at. So I kind of leave Voss out, I leave Van Til right out, I leave, I'm not even, I don't even touch Bart. Just basically chopping massive sections of the discussion right off, and my grid or filter, I suppose, through which to kind of interact with people is just if there was some level of interaction in Kline himself. So if he wanted to engage a certain perspective, and even better if they engaged back, there would be an automatic, very real discussion to be analyzed there, and then you can broaden out from that point. So I mean, those were the three main pieces as I saw them. If you get your head around these pieces, I feel like, at least in terms of Reformed transformationalism, you kind of have a good view of what's happening. And also to see Kline's engagement with all of those allows you very clearly to see how the substructural level of the discussion works, because Kline, I mean, that's where he lived. So he's going to just take it on, whether it's the issue or not. He just goes front and center and just aims for that particular thing. And it's always so perceptive and he can bring these things out so well. So, to the degree that people would respond to what he was saying, it just really centered the discussion nicely in terms of what I wanted to do. So, I mean, I think of, obviously, there's the famous Kline-Bahnsen interaction. So Bahnsen became the key interlocutor there. In terms of frame, I mean, there's the notorious frame Kline ongoing sort of thing. So he became the obvious candidate in that regard. But he deserves his own category, in my opinion, because, the other guys are approaching it from a broadly, covenantal Vossian perspective, using a Vossian biblical theological methodology, you might say. But when I was reading Frame, I was getting like, this guy has abandoned ship on Vossian biblical theological methodology and moving more on his own brainchild here, which, it's fine. Just, it is what it is. But it was just apparent to me that that's why he didn't fit into, he didn't want to quite be slotted in there with the Theonomists or the Neo-Calvinists. He wasn't asking for his own space, but I gave him his own space anyway. I felt like it deserved. Plus, he had written so much about it, so I thought, let me spend a decent bit of time on him. And then, of course, the Doyavidians. I mean, that would be that primarily came from Kline's own. It's in Kingdom Prologue. Let's see if I can remember the page number. 169, I think it was. I might be completely wrong, but there he goes. He just sort of like stops and just all of a sudden starts addressing the mysterious Neo-Doyavidians, which is like a whole new question, like who exactly was he talking about? He doesn't have any footnotes, and so I had to do a little ground canvassing research, and we got all sorts of theories, conspiracy theories to just more plausible theories. But I think that what he was, I sort of gave up the question of who exactly he was talking to, and looked more at what he was critiquing. And it seemed like what he was saying in terms of his critique, he was all about this whole don't let the philosophical structural modism sort of impede on the biblical theological data and so forth. Otherwise, you end up dismissing this legitimacy in the culture, in the common grace kingdom. And so it seemed like that, whatever that was, I mean, it was very relevant to what people flowing on from Doyavid have said, popularizers of his thought right now are saying. So to me, it seemed quite fair to put that was the Neo-Calvinist kind of camp right there. And that if you locate it that way, you've got a bit of Kline speaking to them. And of course, there's a lot of critique and back again from the broader Doividian or Neo-Calvinist camp against Kline, or just at least wanting to think more about what he was saying. So there was a lot for me to work with there. And I think it does form quite an interesting discussion. In fact, that's where I find most, hope for future discussions. It's very interesting because Kline himself, there he is. He's like, I'm very happy. I mean, I never got a chance to ask Kline these questions, but I cannot wait to see him because I'm going to ask him so many things. And one of the things I want to ask is, what did you think about Kuyper, for example? Because he seems very, very happy to be located in that kind of tradition, and he's very thankful for the cosmonomic things that David's doing. And, so he doesn't seem like this rabid anti-Neo-Calvinist guy, and and of course he doesn't know about the Two Kingdom project either, because he died 3 years before Van Drunen puts out his first book. So it's a really interesting space. So I think a lot of the discussion around Kline has been anachronistic in that they've just imputed to him these ideas, like he's obviously a Two Kingdom guy, and that's clearly not the case. And yet it might have been that was the case as things unfolded and he formulated his thinking in light of some of the controversies that broke out. So anyway, those are some thoughts. Man, I've got lost in my own thinking. You got to save me.
No, you didn't get lost at all. I thought that was tremendous. There's all sorts of things to discuss. We'll have to pick up some threads in some future conversations. But to maybe anchor this for those folks who haven't read much Kline or even David Van Drunen, my friend and presbytery brother. We're both members of the same presbytery.
Excellent.
Even though he's out in California, his credentials are still here in the Midwest.
Right.
But, so much of this, we definitely want to get to talking about the cultural mandate before we close up at least this part of our conversation. But before we get there, so much of this rests also on Kline's understanding of the Noahic Covenant and how Noah and the God's arrangement there, specifically in Genesis 9, pertains to or relates to the covenant of grace as a whole. And that's something that Dr. Van Drunen has developed significantly. And that's just an absolutely critical part of his theological project. There's historical components. He's exegeting other portions of Scripture as well to develop his theology. And Dr. Van Drunen and I have had, pleasant, informal conversations about these matters. But that, needless to say, is certainly at the heart of the issue for him, such that if he didn't have those thoughts or those convictions about what's going on in Genesis 9, then his approach would be quite different. So, what are your thoughts on Kline and Noah and how this pertains to your overall project?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And just thinking about Van Drunen's work to begin with, I think, who was it? One of his, I remember coming across someone who said it might have been in the foreword for Van Drunen's book or Politics After Christendom, where, Van Drunen's great innovation is to really develop this Noahic covenant in such a way that it sort of extends into this natural law discussion and so forth. It's almost like you could just extend what he was saying there and say the great innovation is to take what Kline was saying on the Noahic covenant and extend it into that discussion. And I think that's, as I read Van Drunen, I just see, a wonderful summary to begin with of what Kline was saying in terms of his covenant theology. Think of his more popular book, Living in God's Two Kingdoms. That first half, I always recommend it. If you want like just like a real quick overview, you don't want to read Kingdom Prologue, but you want to get like Kline's covenant theology, you can either labor through my chapter 3, which is not quite as accessible as Van Drunen's, but it's just a wonderful little summary of what Kline says there and why his covenant theology matters to the discussion as well. And I should say also, I'm just very appreciative of everything Van Drunen has done. I think he's just this great, clear thinker. There are points that I disagree, but I just always appreciate the way he puts things, even when I disagree with him, because he's just so crystal and so clear all the time. And And so it's always a wonder to me that people come back in such a, difficult, nasty way sometimes when I read some of
Yeah,
his
it's
feedback.
unfortunate. I want to back up my brother there. I have my own disagreements with David on certain points. We all disagree with each other here and there. None of us are identical, but
Right, right.
he is an immensely sharp thinker, just a godly man, a tremendous and charitable person, and a servant of Christ Church. So it is unfortunate that he does get some of the heat that he gets. But I think even when he
Even just a
receives
role
that, he
model.
models charity
Yeah.
very well.
Yeah. I was about to say that. I mean, the way he sort of takes it in his stride and kind of moves on and, just uses the critics as the coach has really been an inspiration to me I mean, I don't think I could do it anywhere as well as he does, but anyways, there we go. So yeah, I mean, I think he's getting what Kline said there, without a doubt, in terms of a covenantal kind of piece. The only thing is that he's moving it in this like insane, way beyond anything Kline ever said in terms of natural law. So I think that's certainly a possibility. I know the argument has been made that because of Kline's kind of category of non-redemptive special revelation, it kind of precludes the possibility of moving in that direction. I mean, I see how that could be said. I suppose I'm thinking more there in terms of the big building blocks. You've got in Kline these unavoidable, like big structural pieces where you've got number one, the covenant of works in the garden parallels, that which Christ is doing in the covenant of redemption. And they are these works-based covenants. And, to the degree that one involves some sort of cultural mandate and the first Adam fails in that, and then the second Adam comes and succeeds in that. I mean, I think Van Drunen is absolutely right to say we got to be really careful before we pick up the cultural task, which is wrapped up in this covenant of works, and then use the language of redeeming culture on top of it. That you could see why the debate gets heated at that point, because it lands very close to a justification issue, or we wouldn't do stuff like that when we talked about the moral law. Would we be so flippant
Right.
using language like that, talking about those elements of the covenant of works? So anyways, there's that in Kline. So I see Van Drunen running with that, and that's right. Obviously, there's this whole issue of typological republication of the Mosaic covenant, of the covenant of works, at least in the Mosaic covenant. And that, I mean, together with eschatological intrusion and all of that, I mean, it's sort of like Kline just takes that right off the table as you just cannot use that as any sort of norm for what the church should strive to be now. Even if you're not gunning to be a theonomist, certainly he kills that possibility. But even just the sort of subtle notion that, Israel was really winning that cultural war. We should try and we don't have to be theonomists, but we just got to try and edge in that direction and try and be more like Israel. He just really moves you away from thinking like that. And I think again, Van Drunen picks that up well and runs with it. And then the last piece that he's working with mainly is this Noahic covenant, and is seen in that light. Even if Kline has said some things, or he himself was more Van Tillian or whatever it was, you've got enough big structural pieces there to work with to build in the direction that Van Drunen does, based on what he says about what he is talking about in the Noahic Covenant. Again, I think that what Kline does though is he's not quite that explicit. So he will certainly want to keep anyone from thinking about the cultural mandate as refracted through the Noahic Covenant. He wants them to not think of that as in any way part of the covenant of works. He wants them to think it has no eschatological reward. It now subserves the purposes of common grace, and it provides a stage for, the covenant of grace, the plan of redemption. It's ameliorative. It's certainly Christians should be actively involved in this refracted form of the cultural mandate, but just again very much in keeping with what Van Drunen is saying, never overloading this or overbearing it with this kind of freight that it can't ever fulfill the expectation of that the covenant of works would be able to fulfill. That if Adam had to do that work culturally, morally, the whole thing, he would enter into this eschatological glory as a result. There would be a a works rest idea, and that is now off the table for the Noahic Covenant. Now we can really go for it, and that's where I see a lot of interplay. Like I think as Kline was seeing, a lot of what Doivit was saying in the cosmonomic idea, and that really helps in that regard. You could really develop a kind of way of going about this cultural mandate in ways that perhaps we're not doing at the moment, and yet just being very clear that that's never going to lead to Sabbath rest. That's going to lead to a firm stage upon which the drama of redemption unfolds in the Old Testament and the rest of God's plan in the New. So yeah, that's some of my initial thinking. I don't know if there's any particular thought that was of interest to you.
Well, there are many, and so it's really intriguing to think through it, and I think that's what's really useful about this book is it gets you thinking about all these different dimensions. And I appreciate the way you put it too, because we're presented in the book, because there's a lot of ways to approach it. I'm going to sound like a multi-perspectivalist myself in presenting this issue, but there are some surprising. I found myself when reading portions of this book thinking, well, yeah, there aren't necessarily simple answers to this, or it's I guess in one way it's hard to categorize Kline so succinctly because he is so unique and approaching issues in his own way that he's not easily boxed in, where you just identify him with one group or the other, as we've alluded to, either with a 2K approach specifically. Yes. I mean, that can be from at least our vantage point anachronistic, or strictly with Neo-Kuyperian, Neo-Calvinist views. We might add others, in terms of more strictly a Vossian approach, if that is distinguished from. Lots of Vossians that I hang with certainly would want to distinguish it from the Neo-Calvinist view. Yes. Although others might see it as a subset, a particular kind of pilgrim subset of it. There's all sorts of things to discuss. Totally. This is like a 3-hour cigar discussion for me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Let's talk about the cultural mandate. Speaking, you're looking at Genesis 1:28 and on into chapter 2. At least in your understanding and your examination of this in the book, the examination of the cultural mandate, what do you think? What would you see as new insights or interpretations that you find particularly interesting or promising, maybe new vistas, if that's a word to use, ways in which Kline is opening up this discussion? To get back to your anecdote about the video store, how does Kline's approach to the cultural mandate post-fall? We're talking post-fall. It's not the same as for Adam, but there are still some aspects and dimensions that are applicable and important for us and mandatory for all people. How does Kline's exploration here maybe open up some new possibilities for us?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, that is the question, I think. Well, for me, at least, as a church planter in New Zealand, I mean, that's the whole goal. And this is the area I think I grew most in, just reading through Kline and thinking about this topic, because you do, even if the authors are not saying as much in the debate between the two kingdoms, and whether we're reading blogs or essays or journal articles or books, I found that I can't help. I sort of impose this, what I think they're saying, and I just read them as sort of being against the other guy. So it's really hard for me to kind of actually hear what they're saying. With Kline, I found that I was able, he would at least say it so differently, or approach it at such a substructural level again, that I was able to kind of hear what's a few possibilities would be. So what I have in mind there is like, you'll read from Kline all about his cultic boundary. It's this whole idea. This is the title of the book and so forth, where it seems like there is this, again, if you read a lot of the two kingdom sort of rhetoric, it seems like he's dividing this cult and culture piece quite severely, and so forth. But you realize that's just on the matter of what we do in terms of a covenant of works and what Christ has done. And that's why he's so heated on that. And I think as soon as you start realizing that, and to the degree that you would see that basic covenant structure, I think most people would agree that we should protect the gospel, leave the gospel as it is, not try and do the gospel, so forth. And then you see other elements in Kline where he himself will just kind of surprise you by saying, we have no excuse to be lethargic about our, he uses the expression to master the atoms, and master this element of creation. We have this, when he talks about the Noahic Covenant and the cultural mandate, I mean, he means business there as well. That is a real mandate for Christians, and it has tremendous implication for vocation and for just what Christians individually should be doing. I see a lot of similarity between what he and Kuyper were saying in terms of the organization idea. So, there you are as an organism, and you have a real task on your hands. This is as much as the Great Commission. It's just that, he wants to keep the lines clear so that you can go ahead and do that with full throttle, not worrying that it's going to lead to theonomy or lead to some sort of, post-millennial utopianism or whatever it is. And that I find is the best way to kind of summarize what Kline's doing there. He's laboring to keep these lines crystal clear, but I think people misread him in thinking, okay, therefore he just wants no connection to any kind of cultural anything. But that's just reading one part of him. At the other section, you've got to see the reason he's laboring on this Noahic covenant so much is to kind of show this is another covenant. I mean, Christ is administering his covenants, and Christ is Lord, and that's why I kind of titled the book "Covenant, Lord and Cultic Boundary," because it's a little bit of a nerdy title. I get that. But, once you kind of read a little bit of Kline, you kind of get what he's doing there. Everyone is rallying around this expression, covenant Lord. It's like a very Reformed thing to say, right?
Right.
Christ is Lord over all, and everyone agrees with that. But, as the one who is Lord, he has also set in place a cultic boundary that, for our own good, we need to respect and we need to be clear on, so that we can apply everything about his lordship correctly and not presume to sort of do things that really he's told us not to do, you might say. So it's kind of interesting the way it intersects with a lot of the application around, or I think of Frame, for example, is very strong on this idea of, because Christ is Lord, therefore, we apply theology to all of life, and the answer to the question, should it be applied there, is always yes, because because he is the covenant Lord. And so we all want to agree with that sentiment. But I think what Kline's doing there is saying, just you need this framework in place so that you can agree with that sentiment without completely wrecking the whole thing that Christ is doing. That's I think the big thing to keep in mind. That's why I think if everyone had that in mind, as those basic boundaries, you would be able to. It wouldn't be about natural law or about something else. That would be just two ways to slice the cake. That would be, you could take it in the natural law direction or a cosmogonic philosophy direction. But ultimately, we're just trying to get at how to do that. As one of the reasons I really appreciated Van Drunen's book, Politics After Christendom, as well, in that there he is, like, really trying to bring in a positive kind of view of how to engage with culture, just in politics and so forth, from a two kingdom perspective. And it's ironic because he's doing a lot of what Doyevet was doing there. He's trying to say, all right, how do we do it? Well, this is how we do it. Here's my big, this is how I'm building it. This is where it's coming from. And they're sort of doing very similar things in many ways. It's just that the lines get crossed and people get angry if you don't have these substructural lines in place. And even if we disagree on the substructural lines, I think it's still helpful, because then you know exactly where the disagreement lies and you stop slinging mud as a result. You just go, okay, well, we disagree on that point of exegesis. And look, we do that many times in many different ways in-house within Christianity. So, as Reformed, we're already so tied together, as Reformed believers, and no matter, let's leave the Reformed identity squabble behind for a second and just go, there we go. We're already a drop in the ocean in terms of Christianity. So let's not lose sight of that. and let's
Mhm.
just look at where the exact disagreement lies, and then just get on with the task and see if we can kind of link hands somewhere along the line.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about that. And of course, as you're not suggesting at all, and you mentioned earlier, that's not to diminish the real distinct differences that
Yes.
people may have with one another, but it also is to keep in mind what is most significant. And also, I've been using this word lately. We need to just have like all these things in proper proportion, and I don't mean that in terms of like Thomistic, doctrine or a chain of
Yes.
being or something, proportionality, but honestly, sometimes we blow things out of proportion in the sense of
Exactly.
might have a
Exactly. Yeah.
smaller matter of this, that, and turn it into something we want to divide over, which is kind of nuts.
Yeah.
But there's the other factor too, where there are different shades when we're talking all these different camps in terms of 2K, Voss, Kline, where Kline fits into all this. And I find that when I discuss things with other people, and meeting people at a conference, for example, say, hey, well, what do you think about this, or what did you think about this
Yeah.
episode or this discussion or this book? And everyone's unique, and no one is identical to someone else, at least people that are reading and thinking for themselves. They all have their own complex of thoughts about this, that, and the other. Sometimes we find that some of these camps overlap, and they're not as distinct, or I should say, they're not hermetically sealed compartments where you find like all the Neo-Calvinists are of this kind and none of them overlap with views of the 2K. It's just not as neat and tidy that way. And sometimes people, they might describe themselves a certain way, but if they wrote all their views down and asked someone else, how do you describe me? They might categorize them a different way. Like,
exactly.
I don't mean to just say these labels don't have any value.
No.
Again, I'm just advocating for some proportionality. And just because one guy says he's a 2K guy and you're a Neo-Calvinist or Neo-Kuyperian, or you want to call yourself Vossian, or you're this kind of Kleinian or that kind of Kleinian, those differences are real, and we need to talk about those. But let's not get so hot about it before we find out what we're actually talking about.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the terminology is kind of worn out a little bit, and we have to, that was part of the thing, I just need a way to rejuvenate the discussion a little bit, because it seemed like it was ending on these weird semantical kind of points. And, if you just got them in the same room, they would just quickly figure out that's really no place to end on right there. Just to rejuvenate the discussion a little bit. Yeah, I agree. There are some real differences, and they should not be diminished at all. But just, it's so helpful. I mean, I don't know if you found this, but for me, let's say we're just thinking in the realm of orthodoxy here. We're not going into heretics or anything like that. But
let's not talk about that.
No. Let's keep it in house, But even within Reformed circles, wow. Where do we start? Where do we begin? We disagree on almost everything, and we agree on almost everything. It's an amazing process. So I've always found that as you talk to someone, and even as you get to the point of understanding, even if you really disagree with what they're saying, I mean, you just kind of hate what they're saying, even just to know like where exactly, because they're seeing a text differently, or they're seeing even just to be able to appreciate, okay, well, that's where they're coming from. Now I'm sounding like a perspectivalist, by the way, but just to see where they're coming from, to see their perspective. There we go. I'll say it. Right. It means that you can locate the debate. You can immediately join on the other issues again and go, okay, well, it's just that we're disagreeing on then, and that's fair enough, because we're both fallen creatures, and that's going to happen. Right. But I don't like it when people start mudslinging on these issues, and it ends up being like, now they're talking Christological heresies, or that sort of thing. I mean, at the end of the day, those are big charges, and we got to be really careful before we sort of start bringing out. I'm not gonna hang out with the Two Kingdom guy because he's doing this Christological heresy thing. I mean, there might be problems that need to be addressed, no doubt about that. Right. But even that needs to be we need to be careful with our language there. If it's there, then fine, call it. But let's first figure it out, and do due diligence to that task. Likewise with all of these, it's almost like you don't even have to go to the two kingdom debate. You just start with Calvinism and Arminianism and so forth. I mean, you got to be really careful. We should know better at some level at this point in the game, I think, that especially on an issue that is already dependent on a Reformed distinctive like covenant theology. I mean, already it's very, very in-house. So we've got to be thinking carefully and guarding unity, I think.
Yeah, these are important conversations. It's interesting, many different people all subscribing to the same set of standards and yet have different ways of cutting this up and understanding the necessary implications of this. But Mike, we're going to have to follow up because this has been a very fruitful conversation, a fun one. But I want the readers and the listeners, the viewers, everyone to understand that we barely even touched on anything in this book. But just, it's all about the book in the sense that we've touched on the high level contours of it, but getting down into the details, perhaps we'll have to address, a couple of those in specific conversations where I can be a little more focused in my own thoughts and ask questions along those lines. But there's so much here to think about. And if anyone out there is interested in understanding how to engage in culture, or at least think about that issue from a Reformed covenantal perspective, then this is an excellent book to read to get you thinking at the very least. But then you can also, follow up with the footnotes and the discussion in the chapters to think more critically about different approaches to that question and pursue those things in line with your own biblical studies and exegesis. So for that, I thank you, Mike, for presenting that and bringing that to us, a thoroughly engaging dissertation, now book. And for the conversation today, this is already just as an entree, or as an appetizer, I should say, a very much a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate it. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. It's been a real honor and privilege. Great to meet you too.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely I'd want to follow up, but everyone, I want people to check out the website. Head on over to reformedforum.org. I'll have links in the episode description. You can get a copy of the book that we discussed today. Certainly worth the time and attention. Pick it on up. I was looking at it at Amazon, but you can find it in multiple places. Wipf and Stock. Covenant, Lord and Cultic Boundary, a dialectic inquiry concerning Meredith Kline and the Reformed Two Kingdom Project, written by our guest today, Michael Beck. Also, check out the Two-Age Sojourner podcast. Are there any specific links or requests that you'd like to let the listeners know about so they can follow up with your work?
Well, maybe it is worth saying that just in terms of the podcast, we are actually running through the book. One of the things is the book is written at quite a heady level. I mean, it was a PhD dissertation. So, and
they can get the detail there if they're hungry for it right now.
Right. So we're trying to translate it and just make it a little bit more accessible to people that are interested. So at least they got a fighting chance when they actually read the book. Because what I'm getting is a lot of I'm really interested, but this is a hard slug. And I get it. So maybe just in fact we've done two. We did our Lee Ines wrote the foreword. We had him on to chat about the foreword, so that was good. And then we've just done chapter 1. Very informal. I mean, my goodness, we do nothing formally on the podcast, so it's just very, very chit chat. But I think it will be helpful to anyone wanting to get in on the terminology and just
that's good.
Think a little bit more about it. Yeah,
I'll try to put links in there as well. And I was watching. I definitely watched the episode with Lee, and was following through with that. So put links to that also in the description for people to follow up if they'd like to learn more and discuss. But it's been great. So
Fantastic.
We'll put the links in the episode there. I do want people to check out our website as well. There's always things going on, and especially in this, I think this will come out just after Thanksgiving, if I'm not mistaken. So people might be listening to this as they're traveling, as they're driving around, as they're spending time with family. But we have got a lot of stuff going on. So head on over to reformedforum.org to make sure that you stay updated. Some sales on books and stuff in the store, as well as events and other things coming up in the future that you're going to want to know about. And you can find all that information not only on the website, but particularly by subscribing to the email newsletter. But again, thanks again, Michael, and thanks to all the listeners and viewers. I do want to thank everybody for watching and for listening, and I hope you join us again next time. on Christ the Center.